What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? Today, we will try to answer that question in 20 minutes or less. I'm Jack Benjamin, a reporter for the Media Leader.
And I'm Omar Oakes, editor-in-chief of the Media Leader.
And this week, we'll be covering what Warner Bros. Discovery's plans are for its Max content in the UK, OpenAI's competition for search dominance, Q2 earnings results from around the industry, and more. But first, Omar, a bit of news you broke exclusively this week is that YouTube has quietly rejoined Barb. Remind us a little bit of the context of this story. This is a big story that you reported on for us actually last year. YouTube had been a part of Barb, but then left amid some row, and now they're back. So what's going on, and why is this important?
It is important. I've got written down in my notes that we're only going to talk about this for 5 minutes, and so listeners should know that the reason, one of the reasons why it was Jack and Ella doing this podcast before is it's very difficult for me to keep my answers compressed. So
do I need to bring out the like air horn to give you time?
We'll do whatever you need to do. I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for you to tell your boss to shut up, essentially. So YouTube has quietly rejoined Barb, the UK TV measurement system, and I say quietly because they don't publicize these things. Some companies choose to. Listeners, readers might remember that in October 2022, I think it was, we wrote about Netflix very publicly telling the world that they joined Barb as part of their journey to becoming an advertising company. Like so much of media, but YouTube has actually quietly come back after leaving last year. And why they left last year was because there was an apparent disagreement. There'll be links in the show notes, by the way. There was apparent disagreement at the time about how YouTube would use the Barb data that was being measured on its behalf. We know that YouTube wants to be more attractive for advertisers, for TV advertisers in particular. So being part of the Barb system is a clear benefit, but there was a disagreement about how it was going to use its data. But now this year it appears to have rejoined. Barb is now measuring YouTube as it was anyway, but Barb is now actually a licensee of it again.
So is that disagreement that happened last year presumably resolved at this point in order for YouTube to come back?
Not really, because what apparently YouTube wanted to do before was to use that Barb data in its own planning tools. And Barb has the right, as the producer of this data, to tell any licensee they have a right to say if you're using that data properly in their view. So they were not keen. This is all reported in the story from last year. They were not keen on YouTube using Barb data within the planning tools, but this is just to be a normal licensee.
Gotcha. Okay. So YouTube wants to be considered more like TV. TV budgets are a huge part of media budgets. Is it as simple as that? As YouTube wants a bigger share of that pie and then needs to play the game a little bit more and join forces, join Barb, figure out other ways. I know there's been a conversation around Project Origin as well. Is that what's motivating them for sticking with Barb?
Well, yes, it's important. It's important that any media company is independently measured, and there are various ways of measuring audience nowadays. There was a story in the FT earlier this week that I thought was quite amusing, where it appeared the headline was something like "Sports viewing on YouTube dramatically increases" or something like that. And you actually read the story, and it looked like a reporter had spoken to the CEO of YouTube, who happened to be in Paris for the Olympics, and had given him some kind of YouTube reported stats about how live viewing has gone up dramatically, but it was hours of live viewing as opposed to impressions. And what I'm trying to say is there are various ways you can slice and dice online audiences nowadays, which is why it's important for advertisers who just want clarity and predictability on how these things are measurements to put it into a JIC, a joint industry currency, or which Barb is one, so that you can compare like for like. It's not very helpful if we always go through such as earnings seasons. We go through lots of company reports, and there are lots of metrics that social media companies in particular will use.
Monthly active users versus daily active users.
And then what's the new one that Twitter is doing? It's,
hours spent or something. I don't know.
Yeah, there's hours spent and there's monetizable hours. There's various ways you can do it. So if you just rely on media companies to report audiences however they want to, then you're not going to be able to compare them properly. I mean, advertisers, they need to be able to compare.
It's worth noting that this news came in the same week as the release of Ofcom's Media Nations report, which drew attention in national press for having a top line showing that less than half of 16 to 24-year-olds were watching broadcast TV in an average week. This seems like a continuation of inevitable trend and one in which YouTube has been a beneficiary. But do you think it's worth being sort of sensationalized in that respect? I mean, is that actually a big deal that fewer people are watching broadcast TV, fewer younger people specifically? It seems like everyone knows this is occurring, right?
It's not just younger people. Everyone is watching less broadcast TV. I mean, it's anyone who listens to this podcast, I don't think it'll be surprised to them that fewer people are watching broadcast TV. But if you look at the Ofcom Nations reports, total time spent with video is up. More people are watching video than ever before. It's just as technology changes, we're watching it on our phones, we're watching it on our tablets. Interestingly, coming back to YouTube, there's quite a significant increase in people watching YouTube on TVs. It's something like 36%, up from 27% from a year ago when they last did the survey. So going back to why it's important to be measured by a company like Barb, it's legitimate to say that more people are watching YouTube on the big screen. So that creates opportunities for broadcasters who want to license their content to YouTube. Sports rights going to be a big thing. YouTube's going to be in that conversation. That's going to impact those figures. And for advertisers, we know, listen to the episode with Dr. Grace Kite, the interview from earlier this week, where, YouTube with sound on is still a very effective advertising platform as opposed to other video formats with sound off. The TV encourages you to do that.
So in other major TV news this week, Warner Bros. Discovery is reportedly in talks with UK carriers other than Sky regarding a potential carriage deal over the distribution of its Max product. That's according to the Financial Times. The context here is that Max, which is Warner Bros. Discovery's combined streaming service between Discovery Plus and HBO Max, has already launched and is launching in European markets other than the UK. And that's because there's been a delay in the UK because Sky currently has carriage deals, exclusive deals, lasting through at least 2025. So I'm curious as well for your thoughts on this story in relation to the broader market. This is actually a pretty big story because we've been trying to follow what's going to happen with Sky and HBO once this current licensing deal ends. And it seems like Sky might be losing exclusivity over HBO content, which would, I imagine, be a really big deal for Sky. I don't know about you, but I can only imagine a lot of people subscribe to Sky specifically to have access to really high quality content produced by HBO. But I'm a younger person, so my viewership is clearly a little bit different, at least according.
Well, you love HBO stuff. Succession is like your favorite show, isn't it?
I do. Yeah, Succession is my favorite show. Well, I imagine lots of people in this industry's favorite show is Succession, given that it's so media focused. But yeah,
I mean. Take a second just to talk about HBO because it's just a fantastic, it's just been over the last 20, 25 years. Just think of all the amazing content that's come out of HBO. Risk-taking, thoughtful, embedded in culture. Even the other day, I was talking to my wife about how, talking about a women's issue and just how Sex in the City just revolutionized just how women talk about things publicly. And Succession,
Game of Thrones, Band of Brothers was an HBO production.
Sopranos. I mean, there's so much stuff that has come out of HBO that's fantastic. This is a big deal for Sky because, as you say, apart from Premier League football, which it pays a lot of money for, you'd imagine that it pays perhaps over the odds. I'm not sure, but you'd imagine it pays a premium to exclusively have HBO content on what was Sky Atlantic. This is a big deal for Sky. This is interesting because you would have thought with everything else that's going on at Warner Brothers Discovery, how streaming, it seems that the market has become saturated, especially with Netflix and Disney Plus entering the advertising tiers, that it would actually be quite helpful for Warner Brothers Discovery to have that guaranteed revenue going forward, i.e. it would make sense for them to just keep the Sky deal going for another 5 years, let's say.
But could they make more money by having more carriage partners? Is that the calculation?
That's going to be the calculation over whether if they license it to Amazon instead. So it could be what's happening is that, somebody has put this story out where they want to maybe put pressure on Sky to come to the negotiating table with a better offer. It could be just shopping around and seeing the best deal that they can get. But I would be surprised if they didn't license it with someone, that if they just decided to put this content on Max UK, because it's a different market, and I think Sky still has a very powerful promotional vehicle behind it. And even though churn being as with Sky, it's tough. They still have secured Premier League football for the foreseeable future. They continue to do so. So I still think it would work in Warner Brothers Discovery favor to keep that going.
So you mentioned Amazon, Virgin Media, and EE were also mentioned by the FT as other potential carriers that were being discussed. So we'll keep an eye on that space. Another big story that we were tracking this week is OpenAI's challenge to Google for search supremacy. We've mentioned before on this podcast and our writing that generative AI is likely to upset the balance of the search market now that so many AI companies, including Google, are integrating large language models into search. Google did so earlier this summer. Now OpenAI has launched a prototype for what it's calling Search GPT. So there's lots of things that people should know about what OpenAI's model is, but it seems like when I was talking with publisher trade bodies earlier this week, that they were a little bit more positive about OpenAI and Search GPT than they were in reaction to Google's AI overviews.
So you're gonna have to explain to me why is this significant? Because this is okay. You're gonna have to educate me, because my understanding of all these people using Bard and ChatGPT, all these LLM based things, is it just seems a fancy version of search. Yeah. So for years we've been using Google to Google. I have 2 young children. So what does it mean when child has red spots on their arm? Literally people will type that into Google. Yeah. Right. Whereas if you do it into a ChatGPT or an LLM, you expect a more comprehensive, you expect something a bit more sophisticated. Right. But essentially it is search anyway, isn't it? So what's the evolution here?
Well, you're right to say it's a similar product. It's essentially having more of a conversation with the search engine, as opposed to you entering a query and then it'll spit out a bunch of different articles and send you around the web. It's you having a direct conversation with Google's AI or ChatGPT, Search GPT, to have an answer. And then you can ask a follow-up question and it will remember the entire string of the questions that you're asking and sort of develop answers. So if you wanted more let's say you were looking for the best travel recommendations in Dublin or something, and then it spits out a bunch of options that you might have had to have clicked into an article to have otherwise found. Then you can ask a question like, tell me a little bit more about this particular option. Is it really good for families? And then it'll give more information on that. And I could see why that could be attractive to a lot of people, especially people that prefer to ask questions in search that are a bit more conversational or a bit more like you want more of those extraneous details included in the query, basically. But from a publisher standpoint, the risk is that if all these answers are just delivered to them in a sort of conversation stream, then people aren't going to be clicking on the links and going around the web, and they might be getting less and less referral traffic. And that's been a concern that we've been flagging since Google made this AI announcement earlier this year. And so ChatGPT getting involved, Search GPT through OpenAI is just another one of those trying to compete directly with Google about this next generation of search and shape what it might be, what it might look like. But publishers, because OpenAI has signed so many deals with so many different publishers, although they are also being sued by the likes of the New York Times and some other local news outlets in the US over copyright infringement. It seems like there's a bit more involvement in the development of what this Search GPT product will look like, inclusive of news publishers, whereas Google kind of just released AI overviews without a lot of input from publishers, and they all kind of freaked out a little bit. So that seems to be a bit of a distinction.
It's just amazing how it's so easy just to rip off intellectual property and just use it to power a platform. I don't understand why in no country, to my knowledge, stop me if I'm wrong, but why hasn't any country put out an injunction and saying, hey, wait, you are just clearly using someone else's intellectual property. Stop until we figure this out.
Well, that's sort of, essentially like all these AI companies trained their LLMs off of all of this free to access, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, you can't see that on a podcast, free to access content on the web, and then have sort of asked for forgiveness afterward as opposed to asking for permission in the first place. And that's when you get all these deals being signed where publishers feel like, okay, you know what, actually we probably need to lean in because this is what the future of the web looks like, and we would rather be on the front foot than the back foot, and hopefully we can get some more money off of this, etc. But there's lots of publishers that haven't agreed to those deals, and those companies then are not having their data necessarily included in whatever this next search experience is, which, you know, it's similar to when search first started. That could be a problem for them, because if loads of people start using Search GPT, then they might not have their articles floated as links included in responses and references and responses, and they might have their search traffic reduced significantly more than if they had partnered. OpenAI says that Search GPT will not be doing that it won't be preferencing the publishers that it has partnered with, has signed deals with, but you know, we'll see what that actually looks like when the product gets more fully developed. But it's a legitimate concern.
Why don't they have preferred status for the people they do deals with? Wouldn't that incentivize them to do deals?
Yes, but they don't want to have a, this is my read, but it doesn't seem like they want to have such a negative relationship with people that they might be in the process of getting a deal done with, or, you know, they don't want to completely piss off publishers who are already suing them, if that makes sense. I think I don't think that they're just trying to be a bit nicer than, especially the competition might be, say, oh, come sign some deals with us and maybe screw over, don't worry about Google over there. You know, they're not as important. We're the future of search, and we've got the best product, and we're willing to work with you. That seems to be the posture. But I think you're right in all of the concerns you've raised. It's a very opaque developing space. There was a report as well this week from Semaphore that Perplexity, which is another one of these competitors, it had to announce its own publishers program, which is a rev share model with media outlets where when content is from those referenced from those publishers is appearing next to ads that they're going to be adding into the service. Perplexity had previously been accused by Forbes of failing to provide proper citations. Wired also alleged that Perplexity had scraped content from news websites using alternative IP addresses. So there's clearly lots of room for bad actors out there, and there's not a whole lot of regulation. And so I think the overall takeaway is publishers need to be remaining on their toes a bit. Finally, there's a load of earnings results. We're not going to have time to get to all of them this week. We'll give them a mention, and we're recording this ahead of earnings for Meta and Snap, but social media companies, big week for them and their earnings. Pinterest did report earnings. Omar, very quickly, I just wanted to ask if anything stood out to you from the earnings report.
Yeah, Pinterest was interesting. So Q2 revenue growth of 21% to $854 million. Bill Reedy, is it Reedy? Reddy? I'm sure it's Reedy, right?
I'm not actually sure. we should ask. Sorry, Bill.
Sorry, Bill. I know you're listening to this. Please correct me, Bill Reedy. He said we're gaining share of ad budgets. And we've talked to Pinterest a lot this year, where they've done a lot to monetize the platform. Definitely doing a lot of B2B marketing as well, and B2C marketing, where they're very keen to eschew this notion that they're kind of just for middle-aged women to kind of post arts and crafts content. Very keen to push their Gen Z usage as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Pinterest definitely maybe flying under the radar a little bit, definitely want to watch.
Yeah, their share price fell after the earnings because their Q3 guidance was a little worse than expectations, but they're still clearly growing ad revenues. Okay, there were a number of additional stories this week that we won't be able to discuss in quite as much detail. Omar, what else should people be aware of?
Oh, this is the news report of it.
This is the news report.
Where we did the music. Oh my God. In audio news, it's Radar Day today. And yet again, Total Commercial Radio hit a new all-time high for listening and continue to increase its share of listening against the BBC. Commercial radio now accounts for 55% of listening compared to the BBC at 42.6%. Whoa, there's a big gap that's emerged. In social media news, Meta, previously known as Facebook, is allowing all US-based creators to make AI versions of themselves that can speak to followers on their behalf. Ooh. Meanwhile, Twitch's mobile app has been updated to look like TikTok, with a new discovery feed prominently shown when opening the app. And in cinema news, Disney's Deadpool and Wolverine earned $444 million in global box office revenue in its opening weekend, the largest ever opening for an R-rated film. People like the sweary stuff from Ryan Reynolds. And finally, in publishing news, Reach, previously known as Trinity Mirror, reported a decline in revenue of 5.2% to $265 million in the first half of 2024. Cost-cutting efforts have appeared to deliver a 23% increase in operating profits.
Thanks, Omar. That is all the time. We were a little over. Little wordy.
Sorry.
Little wordy.
Sorry.
As expected, as
Sorry,
warned.
it's my fault, I know.
We're gonna work on this and get it back under 20 minutes, but it's been a total pleasure chatting with you today. And thanks for listening out there. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks again for listening to the Media Leader podcast. If you like what you hear, guess what? You can read our stuff at our website, themedialeader.co.uk, where you can sign up to our daily newsletter in the UK of analysis, opinion, and commentary about what's going on in media and advertising. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.